All right, ready for a deep dive into something kind of mind-bending.
I'm always up for mind bending. What are we looking at today?
So picture this. You've got Windows 11 running, all smooth, right?
Yeah, I can picture that.
But it's not just running in the old way. It's inside a virtual machine.
Okay, getting interesting. I use VMs, but I wouldn't call them smooth exactly.
And that's the kicker. This person's setup, they're running demanding stuff, games, 3D software, and it's like the VM performance hit just vanished.
No way. What's the secret sauce? Dual CPUs, tons of RAM.
Even better. We're diving into how they did it. It's all about Proxmox.
Proxmox. Okay, I've dabbled with that. Open source virtualization, right?
You got it. But the real star is this thing, GPU pass-through.
Ah, now you're speaking my language. GPU pass-through can be a game changer.
Seriously. At first I was like, GPU, what now? Yeah. But the way this user described it, how much smoother and faster everything ran, I had to know more.
It's one of those things, sounds super techy, but when you get it, it's like magic.
Exactly. Like, usually VMs, they share your computer's resources, but it's always a bit of a compromise, right?
Totally. Think of it like trying to drive a race car in rush hour traffic. You're not going to hit top speed, no matter how powerful your engine is.
Perfect analogy. So how does GPU pass through clear the traffic jam then? What's happening under the hood?
Basically, you're giving the virtual machine direct control over a piece of hardware, like its own dedicated lane in our race car analogy. Usually it's your graphics card.
Okay, so instead of sharing the graphics card with the rest of your system, the VM gets to use its full power directly.
Bingo. Bypasses all the usual bottlenecks and limitations. It's like having a direct line to the good stuff.
And this user actually laid out their entire setup process. Was it as complicated as it sounds?
It's definitely a bit more hands-on than your average VM setup. They were in the BIOS settings, messing with something called IOMMU.
IOMMU, right? That rings a bell,
Yeah.
vaguely. Isn't that something to do with how hardware talks to the system?
Yeah, you need to enable it for this whole pass-through thing to work. And then, of course, there's configuring Proxmox itself.
So pretty hardcore tech stuff. Not exactly plug and play then.
True. But here's the thing that impressed even me. They said the Proxmox website had a step-by-step guide.
Wait, so even for something this complex, Proxmox has good documentation.
Apparently. They were surprised, too. Said it was surprisingly straightforward.
That's good to hear, at least. But let's be real, most people aren't itching to tweak BIOS settings, even with a guide.
You're not wrong. For your average web browsing, checking emails, a regular VM is more than enough.
So when is this GPU pass-through magic really worth the effort?
It's for those times you need that raw horsepower. Think high-end gaming in a VM, video editing, 3D rendering, stuff that usually makes you think, I gotta do this on bare metal.
So it's like the best of both worlds. VM for isolation, but without the performance penalty.
Exactly. And this user, they were geeking out about the multi-OS potential.
Multi-OS, meaning, sorry, sometimes I forget not everyone speaks fluent tech jargon.
No worries. They meant running, like Windows 11 for one thing, then Linux for another, all on the same machine, but smoothly.
Okay, that makes sense. But I gotta ask, they mentioned macOS at one point. Isn't getting macOS on a PC like the holy grail of Hackintoshing?
It's a bit more niche, for sure. Apple's picky about their hardware. But with the right setup, it is possible. And here's where it gets interesting. They called out AMD GPUs. Apparently, they're great for this.
AMD, I thought they were mostly known for CPUs. What makes their GPUs good for virtualization, especially macOS?
It's a combination of things. Their drivers play nicely with Linux, which helps with macOS VMs in general, and they've been really active in the open source community. Good for compatibility.
So theoretically, one machine, Windows 11, Linux, even macOS, all running happily thanks to Proxmox and this GPU magic. That's wild.
It really changes how we think about operating systems, right? No need for separate computers for each one. And speaking of pushing limits, they also mentioned this thing, vGPUs.
vGPUs. Okay, that's a new one on me. Is that like virtual graphics cards, but on another level?
Kind of. Think of it this way. With GPU pass-through, one VM gets the holy graphics card, right? vGPUs let you split that power between multiple VMs.
So instead of one VM getting a whole pie, you're cutting the pie into slices. Each VM gets a piece.
You got it. Useful for things like virtual desktops, where not everyone needs a whole GPU's worth of power all the time.
Makes sense. But from what I gathered, setting up vGPUs is even more involved than GPU pass-through, yeah.
Yeah, you need specific hardware drivers. It can get tricky. Not something I'd recommend for a beginner, unless they're feeling adventurous.
Right. So for our listeners, sticking with GPU pass-through seems like the way to go if They're after that seamless gaming or multi-OS experience we've been talking about.
Definitely. Proxmox makes it relatively painless. There are guides out there. It's a good entry point. But one thing that really stood out to me was this user's emphasis on efficiency.
Ah, yeah. They were running their whole setup on one machine.
Mm.
Media servers, backups, the works.
They even mentioned another user running TrueNAS and Veeam, both chugging along perfectly on Proxmox. It's like a testament to how powerful this stuff can be.
It really makes you wonder, why aren't we all doing this? VMs used to mean compromise in my head, but this is different.
It's like finding a cheat code for your computer, right? Same hardware, but suddenly it's a whole new ballgame.
And the best part, this isn't some crazy expensive setup. It's achievable. People are doing it right now.
That's what's so exciting. It's making me rethink the limits. If we can get this much out of one machine, what's next?
Seriously.
Yeah.
Will we even need separate computers for different tasks anymore? It's like having your own personal data center.
Right. The line between virtual and real, it's getting blurry. Who knows what computer will even mean in a few years?
This whole deep dive has got me inspired. I'm going to be researching Proxmox all week now. Maybe it's time I join the VM party.
I'm telling you, it's worth a look. And the communities are great, helpful, friendly. Don't be afraid to dive in, experiment a bit.
Couldn't agree more. All right, that's it for today's deep dive. We've gone from VM basics to, like, the future of computing. If you're as fascinated by this as we are, head to our website. We got links to all the resources we mentioned. Until next time, keep exploring, keep learning, and keep on diving deep.